Today I'm going to show you how to set up an open source web application called Redmine. Redmine is a great project management tool that can be used to track issues or record your time on your design or development projects. It can also be extended to handle functionalities such as billing or managing an agile development process. I'll get started by creating a new virtual machine with Vagrant. I'll call it VB and I'll use the command vagrant up VB in order to start the machine. Now that the machine is running, I'll use SSH to log into its terminal. Using Vagrant and VirtualBox is not a requirement to set up Redmine. I'm using these tools because they're great for demo purposes, but you could easily set these up on your local computer or a server. I'm going to use Ubuntu's apt-get package manager in order to download Apache. Apache will be used as our web server for our application. It failed to get the Apache package, so first I'm going to have to update the package manager. You can run sudo apt-get update in order to get the most recent packages. Now you should be able to install Apache successfully. Once Apache is installed successfully, you should be able to navigate to the default document route for the web server. Now we want to install the most recent stable version of the Redmine application. In your browser, you can navigate to www.redmine.org. From there, if you go to the Downloads tab, you'll see the most recent version at the top. Copy this to your clipboard, and then you can paste it into your terminal. Now we can use the wget command to download the tar to the current directory. In order to write to this directory, you may have to run this command as a super user. Prefix the command with sudo in order to do this. If you list the items in the current directory, you'll see that we'll now have a version of Redmine that has been tarred and gzipped. To unpack this file, we'll use the tar command and pass it the zxvf flags. This is for zip extract verbose file. Now you should see the expanded project directory if you list the files. Now we're going to install MySQL Server as the database backend for Redmine. The installation process should prompt you to create a password for the default root user. For this demo, I'm going to use the password root. On a production environment, this is ill-advised for security reasons. Now I can log into MySQL using the user and password we just created. The show databases command will list the default databases that come with MySQL. We need to create a new database that is specific to the Redmine application. In this case, I'm going to name it Redmine. And then we can exit the MySQL prompt. Next, navigate to the directory where your project is stored. If you list the files in this directory, they should look something similar to this. You'll notice that one of your directories is labeled config. If you look inside of this folder, you should see the following files. We need to make a copy of the database.yaml.example file and remove the example so we can use it in our environment. Once you have a copy of the file ready, edit it using the Vim text editor. If you don't have Vim installed, you can use Nano or VI instead. In this file, we're going to set the connection information so we can actually link the application up to our database. You want to change the password for the production environment to root because that's the password we set for our MySQL user. If you use a different password for your MySQL user, set that here. I'm also going to go ahead and set up the password for our development and testing environments as well. However, in this demo, I'll only be using the production environment. To save this file and exit the Vim text editor, use :wq for write quit and then use an exclamation point for overrides. The same commands can be used in the VI text editor. Now I'm going to install a tool called RVM, which stands for Ruby Version Manager. This will allow me to install different versions of Ruby alongside our system default. The curl command that I ran returns a response that says I need to download additional signatures. I'm simply going to copy the command provided and paste it in the terminal in order to run it. RVM is still not installed yet, but if I run the curl command again, it should run successfully this time. However, you still may have trouble running RVM commands. Try sourcing your bashrc file in order to update your paths. Now you should be able to run your RVM requirements. I speed up a lot of setup and download processes in order to save time in this video. If your process takes a little longer than this, you shouldn't worry. Now you can install specific versions of Ruby. In this case, I'm going to use version 2.0. And then I'm going to use the gem installer to get Rails. If you're not using a dev version of Ruby 1.9, there's a chance you'll get an error downloading Rails. Even though we installed Ruby version 2 with RVM, we're still using the system default version, which is 1.9. If you list the Ruby versions under RVM, you'll see that 2.0 is neither set to the default or current version. You can set Ruby 2 to the default version by creating an alias. However, that won't change the version of Ruby that is currently running. You may also be having trouble running RVM commands. Don't worry about actually trying to run these commands, I'm just using them as an example. Creating our alias has successfully set Ruby 2.0 to our current and default version. However, you can see it's still not the version our system recognizes. Also, I'm using RVM 1.27 in this demo. One thing we can do is make sure that our system recognizes RVM. So I'll update my bashrc file in order to export the path. Again, I'll write and quit this file by doing :WQ!! And then I'll source bashrc in order to make sure the changes take place. I wrote that command incorrectly. You have to start with RVM before using the keyword use. Now our system should recognize Ruby 2. Now that we have the correct version of Ruby running, we should be able to install Rails successfully. I'm also going to install a bunch of other dependencies. And then I'm going to gem install bundler. Now I'm going to use bundler to install Redmine. I'm going to specify not using the development and test environments. However, I'm getting another error using bundler. I was able to fix this error by installing bundler without using sudo. I think this was happening because when I was using bundler as a super user, I wasn't getting the path information from my bashrc file. Now using the bundle install command should work fine. Next, we need to install Passenger in order for Apache to be able to serve up a Rails application. And then we want to enable the Passenger Apache 2 module. Then you can just follow the prompts. We want to use Ruby since Rails is a Ruby-based application. The prompt should notify you if you're missing required software. I'm just going to copy and paste to install these dependencies. Again, I needed super user permissions in order to install this. Run the Passenger Apache module installation command again. Once again, choose Ruby. Now, since I'm using a virtual machine, I'm being notified that I don't have enough RAM in order to finish the installation process. I'm also being advised to set up a swap memory, which takes some of my hard disk space and allows me to have a failover for my memory. So I'll leave the prompt using Control-C, and then I'll exit from my virtual machine by typing exit. Now on my local machine, which is an Ubuntu laptop, I can list the files and see that I'm in a Vagrant directory. The main file in here is a Vagrant file that holds my configuration for my virtual machine. I'll use Vim to edit this file. I'll uncomment a line that I had written previously that will increase the memory of my virtual machine. In order for these changes to be realized, I'll reload my virtual machine. And then I can sign back in via SSH. I'm also going to set up some swap memory per the recommendations. I use 4 GB, but that's probably excessive for a lot of people's use cases. 1 or 2 GB should be fine. Then I'll change permissions on the file I created. I'll also make the file a swap. And then I'll enable the swap file. I'll also edit the FS tab file in order to update some of the information on the partitions of the system. This way we don't have to set up the swap file every time we want to reload our virtual machine. Now if you check your system's memory, you should see that it's been increased. There should also be a swap file available. If we run the Passenger Apache module installation again, this time we should have all the resources we need to complete the process. Once the installation has completed, you'll be presented with some information that you can use in order to update your Apache file. Copy this information to your clipboard and then edit your Apache configuration file. First, press enter to get out of the prompt. On an Ubuntu server, your Apache configuration is located at etc apache2 apache2.conf. Then just scroll to the bottom of this file. In Vim, you can jump there using capital G and then paste the information from your clipboard. Next, we need to configure Apache so it can handle incoming requests and route those requests to the appropriate document root where the application is located. So navigate to the Sites Available folder within your etc apache2 directory. This is where the different configuration files for each of your sites is held. You can copy the default configuration file and use that as a template. You'll probably need superuser permissions in order to write to this directory. Now edit the file you just created and change the document root so it points to the Redmine application you set up. The path needs to be exact in order for this to work. I'm going to double check just to make sure I'm getting the spelling correctly. And then I'll update the document root and save the file. We also need to go to the Sites Enabled folder. This will allow us to choose which configuration files are actually active. We can enable the new configuration file we created by creating a symlink to it. You could optionally disable the default configuration file that points to the HTML folder by deleting the default symlink. I'm just not going to do that in this demo. Now if you restart Apache, the configuration changes you just made should take effect. Once again, I'm going to exit my virtual machine in order to do some local configuration. I'm going to edit the Vagrant file in order to get my internal IP address that I'm using for the website. Once I copy this to my clipboard, I can exit the file, and then I can edit my etc host file, which routes IP addresses to names. I'll set up a link to route my virtual machine's IP address to the name Redmine Demo. Feel free to name this whatever you want. This is really only for local development. Then I'll save the file and I'll SSH back into my virtual machine. Now if I visit the alias I just created, I should see some sort of response from the server. You need to add a / to the end of your address in order for your machine to know you're looking for something local and not trying to do a Google search. Okay, we're seeing the default Apache response. That's good, but we're not seeing the Redmine application. Go back to the terminal and edit your application-specific configuration file. Here you want to set the server name directive to be the name that you created in your hosts file. In my case, it was Redmine Demo, but you may have used something different. For any changes in your Apache settings to take place, you need to restart the web server. I also wasn't quite specific enough with my document root. If you take a look at your project files in your Redmine application, you'll see that there's a public folder. This is where we need to point the document root specifically in order for the application to serve up the appropriate files. So edit the application-specific configuration file once more. Make sure you're getting it from the Sites Available folder and not the Sites Enabled folder. and then simply update your document root so it's pointing to public and not just the base application. After saving the file, restart your web server one more time. And then visit the application. You may need to reload the page or possibly even clear the caches of your browser. Now we're getting a response from the application, although it seems to be incomplete. Navigate back to the base directory of your application. And then run this rake command in order to generate a secret token. If you restart Apache and then navigate back to the browser, you see we're getting really close to getting the application up and running. To fix the 500 server error, go back to your terminal and run a database migration. Reload the page one more time and we're good to go. The default user that comes with Redmine is admin and the password is admin. I really hope you enjoy using Redmine on your projects. There's some really great features out of the box. There's also a lot of great ways to extend it by visiting www.redmine.org. Of course, if it's missing a feature you really need, you could write code to extend it yourself and the community would be psyched.